I will always say this. I truly believe that self-awareness is both the bane to a neurodivergent's existence while simultaneously being the anecdote of our survival. So what does that mean? I find that there's a lot of neurodivergent folks out there who have such an intense layer of self-awareness where they can't seem to snap themselves out of these rumination loops where after a certain situation has passed, after a certain social interaction has passed, we end up ruminating on that situation again and again, trying to find new understanding, trying to pass accurate judgment as to how well we did, as to what improvements we need to make on ourselves, as to what did we do right and we have to do it again next time. We analyze and observe ourselves from a third person point of view, so much so that it causes a lot of mental and emotional turmoil. There's actual studies coming out about this very phenomenon of masking and what that does to you. Not just your mental and emotional health, but how does that physically and medically affect you as well? Because it really does take a huge toll on a person's body, on a person's nervous system to always ruminate and get stuck literally on these loops of thought patterns that negatively impact our view of ourselves and how we feel about ourselves. And I oftentimes find that with a lot of neurodivergent discourse online, we tend to get stuck in this area of what to do about this knowledge, right? A lot of people say it doesn't matter how people perceive you or respond to you. The world kind of needs to catch up to our form of expression and communication as much as we have been trying to do that for them. And yes, I agree with that sentiment in many senses, but the other conversation is also rooted in a very real reality of that's not where we're at. That's not where the world has ever been. And it'll be a long time before we get to a place where that would be a possibility for us. So not masking isn't necessarily an answer. We really do have to mask because as soon as we stop masking, all of a sudden, everything in our life starts to fall apart. Maybe we end up getting fired from a job. Maybe you start getting targeted by people in your life, whether that's at your job or within your personal life. You start getting targeted within your communities. You start to lose support. You start to lose community. You start to lose friends, loved ones. You start to lose a very viable way to make money and support yourself, put food on your table. And that's not realistic, right? And this is a very real conversation because a lot of the houseless people in our world are unsupported, undiagnosed neurodivergent folks who just never found a way to take part in the system, assimilate properly because they weren't set up right, because they didn't have the support they needed, because the system just doesn't allow them a place to take part in a healthy way. So they end up being forgotten and neglected by society. Ooh, I'm getting worked up just talking about this. All of this to say, let me bring it back into the topic in the center of all of this. Sometimes the path to loving yourself may be so unattainable, not because you aren't working hard enough, not because there's something wrong with you, but because the system you're trying to take part in doesn't have a place for you yet. And so sometimes on the path to trying to obtain that self-love, the best you can do is to just obtain a sense of neutrality, and that is okay. It's important to take baby steps. It's important to allow yourself the natural spiral upwards, the natural progressions, the natural arcs of what it takes to bring yourself out of that deep pit of shame, that deep well of self-rejection that is ingrained in how our society teaches you to treat yourself. I say this because it's not only something that I've struggled with in my life, very profoundly so, but I see a lot of other neurodivergent folks struggling with this as well. This idea of self-love and how it's just so impossible. I talked about how affirmations oftentimes doesn't work for us. And I think it's kind of in line with this topic as well, where self-love in general is very, very hard for us to obtain. And it's because our survival hinges on us rejecting ourselves. That is a very, very polarizing existence to try to bring into balance, right? How do you love yourself if the only way to survive is to reject yourself? Think about it this way. Let me break it down really quick. When I say rejecting yourself, I mean you have to reject the way that you would naturally process a conversation, information, data, whatever it is. You have to reject, oh, maybe I learn better as a visual person. Maybe I learn better just getting in there and doing things. Maybe I would take in that information better if I was moving around and doing something while listening to you. But because our society negatively judges that sort of behavior and it looks down on people who aren't able to sit down for hours on end and read words on a book or on a page or listen to a lecture for hours on end and just soak it in, sitting completely still in the classroom, whatever it is. Or even if you're just talking to someone, if someone was telling you something and you're up moving around with your hands or your body, they would think that you're not listening. They would think that you're disrespectful. So even with something as simple as ingesting, processing data, we are rejecting the way that we would naturally need to process properly and effectively in order to assimilate and communicate to other people that we are smart, we are respectful, we are in tune, we do care. And think about it in all of these other areas of your life, all of these other areas in which you're constantly needing to sacrifice, which is essentially rejecting yourself in order to operate in a way that makes sense for other people, rather than just existing as you are and having that be the accurate, proper signal to others. It's not enough for me to just be a caring, loving person. As a neurodivergent, I would have to turn myself into a caring, loving person that other people are willing to see as caring and loving. And there's something really wrong with that. When the only way to properly signal any sort of positive outlook of who you are to the world around you is to reject yourself. And so a lot of neurodivergent people on the journey of understanding their neurodivergence and unmasking, we hit a crossroads in which we ask ourselves again and again the very important question of, well, in this process of unmasking, do I choose myself or do I choose survival? And you see the problem we hit, right? Do I choose myself or do I choose survival? Oftentimes you would think that choosing yourself means choosing survival, right? And for many people it is. That is the case. But for neurodivergence, this is why it's so important for you, if you're neurodivergent, to find neurodivergent creators that you actually resonate with, because our lived experience is so different in many ways. Our survival as neurodivergent folks oftentimes means you are not choosing yourself. But the irony is, when you lived your whole life neglecting yourself and choosing survival, you do hit a breaking point where you, the one you've been neglecting, is having a harder and harder time surviving. That is what I want to talk about today. Once you've had that realization, once you've hit that breaking point, what do I do then? Because I want to still survive, but at the same time, I don't want to survive at the cost of my actual ability to keep surviving. Because once you keep trying to survive in this area, by assimilation, by masking, your actual human self, your human body, your human mind, emotions, your human spirit breaks down so much to a point where it literally cannot survive anymore. Because you've been effectively broken down. You've been effectively debilitated by the world around you. And so even if you want to put effort into surviving again, you can't, because your actual human self can't survive anymore. So what do we do when we're here? Let me make it simple for you guys. The best thing that you can do when you're at this crossroads is to develop nuance that actually centers yourself. nuance that will always be weighed towards and returned to a very strong, steadfast, authentic sense of self. And this is an important distinguisher because I really do believe that a lot of neurodivergent folks have a lot of nuance because we've had to. That's part of masking. That's part of assimilation, is to develop a mind that's able to hold multiple truths at once, because you have to fit into those truths at a snap of a finger, in a blink of an eye. Regardless of if you agree with it or not, you just have to fit in, you have to assimilate, right? So a lot of us do have nuance, right? But what we struggle with is being able to weigh that nuance, all of those data points, against our actual self, our actual center. And when you don't have that center, it makes life very, very unsustainable to live because it's unstable. Let's say you have a huge stack of papers on a desk and the window's open and the wind is blowing in, right? And it's kind of blowing the papers up, and it kind of risks having the papers blow away off your desk, all that kind of stuff. And then you take a pretty heavy, hefty rock, you put it on the center of the stack of papers. And then when the wind blows in, even if it blows the papers up and it's all rustling and whatnot, the rock and the weight of the rock being put on the center of the pile of papers keeps the papers in place, and it doesn't let the papers blow everywhere. That's what it's like to have a stable sense of self, a stable center to always return to. It's very hard to go through life holding that much data, holding that much nuance, if you don't have a very strong sense of self to balance that weight out. So another metaphor is, imagine a scale, right? On one end is you and your sense of self. On the other end is everything and everyone else. If you're constantly putting more and more on this end while neglecting this end, it's not going to be balanced at all, right? And so part of the neurodivergent experience is actually being able to build more and more capacity within yourself for those data points, while also holding space for yourself at the same time. And you really do, in a sense, have to expand inwards a lot. And that's what it takes to try to have as much balance as we can in our life. We can't afford to neglect ourselves. We can't afford to be ignorant either and just say, who cares? We don't need a mask. Everyone should just accept us. Either way, it's going to be imbalanced. That's just the world we live in right now. Obviously, I hope we can eventually grow out of this place. But in the meantime, it is important to hold space for both ends. How does the world see me? How does the world want to see me? How do I see myself, and how do I want to express that? How will the world respond to that? Will it see me accurately if I were to express myself this way? And if that's the case, how else can I express myself to be seen accurately in a way that doesn't cross my own boundaries? That's how the conversation needs to go inside of us, right? Not just, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? What do I need to become? What do I have to say? It's all about them, and satisfying the external world. The internal conversation needs to be, external world, how do I feel about it? External world, what am I willing to do? You're always weighing everything against your centered self. That's how you make your decisions. That's how you maintain balance. Nuance without self-compassion will destroy you. Remember that, you guys. Nuance without self-compassion will absolutely destroy you if it's not already destroying you. It's not sustainable. And I always like to bring it back to practicality, because that kind of goes hand in hand with people who don't love themselves, because a lot of people will say, well, it doesn't matter. I hate myself. It is what it is. And it's like, okay, yeah, you hate yourself, but also that's not sustainable. So let's do something about it if that's the case. Let's live a sustainable life. If you don't have enough self-love to care about yourself when you're suffering, at least know when something's not practical anymore and do something about that. Okay, I'm going to try to work with you guys here. I'm going to try to level with you guys here. Developing nuance that centers self-compassion and self-understanding means that you're able to know when you're not right for a person or a situation, while also knowing that that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means that you're able to express yourself as authentically as possible, because some people might be able to see you for who you actually are, while other people may still very much so still misunderstand you. But you're willing to honor yourself because it's not just for you, but for whoever else will resonate with you. Nuance centered in self-compassion means that you are able to tell when a certain person or situation calls for you to need to express yourself authentically, but in a language that they would only understand, and you're willing to bridge that gap because it matters more to you that other people are able to actually understand the message you want to communicate to them. And so you're willing to bridge that gap, even if it comes at the expense of how you would naturally want to express it or communicate it. Nuance centered in self-compassion means that you know when you want to communicate authentically, even if no one will understand, but because it's less about them and more about you honoring yourself and your truth. So if you're a person that finds themselves ruminating quite often, I want you to remind yourself that nuance needs self-compassion, and it also needs neutral judgment. If you're going to constantly weigh all of these data points against themselves, make sure that you're also able to weigh it against yourself, especially when the conclusion always comes to what you need to say and do, and it involves you in any sort of capacity. Make sure that equation includes you. And in that process, it's okay to judge yourself because it's somewhat necessary to judge yourself. But just because you're judging yourself doesn't mean it has to be negatively, right? We can judge ourselves neutrally. And I think that's a really, really good compromise here, because I oftentimes find that neurodivergents are scared to be confident or think highly of themselves or positively of themselves at the cost of losing self-awareness. So we think that to be more realistic is to judge yourself more harshly and negatively, but either or is not realistic or reasonable. Judging yourself very harshly is not as realistic as you think, y'all. I think it's better to judge yourself neutrally. You can think to yourself, yeah, I didn't do well, but that's not necessarily because it's a me problem, but because people in this situation didn't understand me. So how can I do better? You see what I'm saying here? Have your nuance, but have that nuance be centered with self-compassion, and have that process of nuance include neutral judgment. And with that being said, y'all, take your dehydrated ass to the nearest cup of water or bottle of water and take a sip of water, take a gulp of water right now, because I know you probably have not been drinking water as much as you need to. Drink that water, eat a snack, take a deep breath, take some time to regulate yourselves today, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.